Hey, we're on. Hi, everybody. How you doing? Leslie here, Leslie Plazzic, my friend Zazoo Plazz, and my little Easter gnome friend over there, the Easter tree. It's not. I have some surprises for next week. It's not Easter yet, so I'm gonna wait. You know, we uh, we kids raised Catholic. It's ingrained. It's ingrained. This is how we do. Even now. It's okay. So it's actually the 14th. Let's not get too far ahead. Okay, Zazu, stay on track. It's too long lately. Okay, I'm going to try to cut it down a little bit, but it's hard. I have so much I want to say. It's 6:47, April 14th, Monday morning, and so my report is really for yesterday, which was the 13th, which was Palm Sunday, which is my youngest kid's birthday, and yeah, so. Um, 22. Wow. Say hi to his dad. Is always watching. Um, they had dinner together with the girlfriend and my oldest son. So, and hopefully I'll see the kid maybe for Easter because our oldest son went off. He's flying off to Italy this week to see his girlfriend over there. And they're gonna look at you know they're going to Rome. They're gonna be in Rome on Good Friday. Wow. These kids are, he's a traveler. These kids they're doing great things. Jealous, but never mind. No, I'm not. I got my work to do. Um, I've never been to Italy. Maybe someday I'd like to go there. But yeah, she's over there studying art history. It's part of her college. She's at college in New Haven. So she's over there studying and soaking up all the culture. And so he's going to go over there, spend a few days, and then he'll be back for his brother's graduation in May. So yeah, so it got me thinking. I well, so what I did was I sent the kid an e-card and a gift card and all that, and he was busy. No, he barely had time to see anybody, even his friends. He said he had to postpone seeing his friends because he's got a month left till he graduates, and he had all these papers. He said he was doing a paper on white-tailed deer um, management and all this. So and he had another thing due, and he was just swamped. So he went for a hike with his girlfriend, and he said he hung out with the cat. He just got a cat, and so it sounds like he had a good day. And then he over at his dad's, he had a cake, so that was good. He got a cake, but it got me thinking. He's born in 2003. That's a year of communication, right? So, and that's kind of like that follows some of the themes for today. Um, if you're born in the year ending in a three, and I've got a lot of planets in my third house, so I can understand this. Um, so it's Palm Sunday, and that's traditionally the long for us Catholics, growing up Catholic. I just what I'm doing is going back and I'm looking at all these things, and I'm picking them apart and I'm going real deep. And part of my journey is it's connected to music because I grew up listening to a lot of music and it's all tied together in my head. I'm on this quest, this journey, for myself. And I find that music lyrics and the readings, for the week, they they mesh, and the music, and I think that most pop song and rock songs really can be interpreted from a higher perspective, not from when I was a kid when I used to hear them. But as we're in our 50s, we can look back and say, oh, I can see this from another point of view. Not just like there's several levels that you can interpret everything from. You know, whether it's a book or a painting, artwork. It's all art is I think the means by which we we come to see the world in a new light. Even if it's a song that we've heard many times before, we're different. So when we hear it, we can look at it, and even these readings, the readings in the Bible that I grew up hearing. And for me, it's when I used to be in church, I'd be with other people, and or I'd hear a song and I'd be with other people, and you don't have the space when you're crammed into a church and everybody's, the Passion Sunday. That was the one where you always had to wear comfortable shoes, because growing up, I'd go with my parents and I'd say, oh no, because that was the one where you had to stand for the reading of the Passion. And you felt like you were going, the thing was that you had to suffer with Jesus. I felt like, I got to wear flat shoes because I'm going to be standing for an hour. And then they'd act it out. They'd have the priest would be Jesus, and then they'd have like the deacon and all the parts, and everybody would be having it was like, you had to suffer. You had to go along the Passion with Jesus. And, if you weren't in pain, at the end of it, well, you'd get to kneel halfway through, and then you had to stand up. And as kids, you'd be, ugh, and then you get an elbow, if you dared slump or like lean on something, lean on the pew, you know, you got all the nuns and everybody would be there. They'd be watching you to make sure you weren't, yeah. And then, then well, one of the things the when I stopped going to church, right, a few years ago, what they did was they took all the missalettes out on Palm Sunday. So you couldn't read along. You had to just listen to them reading it. And for me, I have to see the words. I have to see the words, and I don't want to listen to them. I want to interpret it for myself. So I said, I'm out of here. They took the word, they took the missalettes. It's like, it's almost like they took our power away. Or not power, but our ability to think for ourselves. We have to listen to other people. Striped socks. Gotta show the socks. I don't know. I sort of felt like that's the last straw. If you can't let us, follow along in the missile, what's the point? You know? And I thought, well, that's awfully strange, because growing up, you could always at least, read along. And sometimes I'd skip ahead because I'd want to get it, speed it up, get to the, I don't mean, there isn't a good part, but, I would read faster than they could speak it. So I would follow along, on my own. Anyway, I was a different kind of kid. I dove deeply into the the Holy Week. I had my own sort of way of observing it. Anyway, uh, but now I'm different. Now I'm freeing myself from that. And in human design, I'm a 3/5, and I've been hearing about that. The 3 is the martyr, and that's the conscious part. That's the part I'm aware of. That this that suffers, that makes mistakes and falls. Right. By the way, they said there is no mention in the Gospels that Jesus fell when carrying the cross 3 times, but all the stations of the cross have it. I find interesting the number 3. The number 3. And then the 5 is the heretic. And that's the part that you're not aware of because it's unconscious. But that's the second part that I'm getting onto now, where I'm telling my stories, right? I'm talking about all the times that things didn't work out for me, right? The times I fell. Uh, well, literally or figuratively or whatever. And then, to uplift people, I'm telling my stories. So then I find this reading here. Let's go. Isaiah, the Lord has given me a well trained tongue that I may speak to the weary a word that will rouse them. Open my ears. That's funny because my kid, his birthday is Palm Sunday. He has big ears because he's a musician. Like my dad. My dad's a musician. He's got big ears. So he got his grandfather's ears. Big, even as a kid, you have this little head and these big ears sticking out. It was so cute. But that's for listening. Anyway, and I talk about, it says that I say, I have not rebelled. I set my face like flint, knowing I should not put to shame. There's a determination here. Rebellion that's Aries. But Jesus was a Pisces. So Pisces did not shield himself from, where it says this. Now, this is Isaiah the prophet talking about the things that were happened to Jesus. Um, so, Pisces is all about surrendering, letting go, you know, sort of uh, letting yourself just, melt into there's a lot of Pisces energy right now. We got everything in Pisces, except the sun's in Aries. But, the North Node's in Pisces. There's a lot of, Piscean. That's surrender into the nothingness, just letting go. You know, and Pisces also, the shadow of Pisces is the victim, the martyr. They can fall into martyrdom, like, oh, I'll do it for you. I'll do everything for you, and losing ourselves, in this. I have Pisces, but I have some Pisces placements, Saturn and Chiron and a lot of other things, you know, in my sixth house, which is service, right? And work, yeah, daily, habits. So I can relate to this, of which I speak here. Um, it's easy for me to fall into this whole thing, but he doesn't defend himself because you know there's no need. So if you're sure, okay. So for us, it's like if you're sure of what your purpose is in life, right? You don't have to worry about people putting you down because you're sure of it. God's got your back because He put you here. God put you here, the divine source universe put you here to accomplish this mission. And you ain't getting out of here unless you do it, or else you got to come back and do it again, and you don't want to do that. So there's that. Um, yeah. So in other words, it shouldn't bother you. Um, Once you've got your sole purpose, you're determined. Your face is set like flint. You're not distracted by this thing and that thing and that. You know, and that's almost 90% of it, right? Once we know who we are and what we're here to do, our highest purpose, we don't have to worry about anything, right? Because all those things will just fall off. So, we've all heard that, my God, why have you abandoned me? That verse, the dogs and the evildoers closing in. So, that's, when you have good energy, sometimes gremlins try to attach to you, Um, it talks about what the Lord rescued him. That it was Jesus, people wagging their heads, mocking him and stuff, you know. But takes energy to defend yourself, right? And if you know you're right, and you know God knows you're right, you know you're right because you have faith in God, who's put you here for this purpose. You don't have to waste energy on that, right? You can just, take your energy back, take it back, and don't go away. So then, it talks about, let's see, Paul the Philippians. I'm not going to go into all these. There's just way too many readings here. But I wrote down some phrases, about how Jesus came as a slave. In other words, emptied himself. It says he came in a human form, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. That's something to be grasped. It's almost like, you know, how can we grasp that? I mean, we don't know what God is. So saying he's equal, you know, it, um, he, he emptied himself. So that's again another Piscean thing. To be a slave, that's Pisces. Um, the Virgo, Pisces, Virgo is kind of like that too. Virgo is, um, opposition. We have a Virgo opposition to sort of, you know, it's it's it has to do with purity and cleanliness and finding fault and things like that. So that's an opposition to the end of the end of Pisces. That's what I'm thinking. Equality with God. All of us have that. He was called the Christ light, right? Um, in other words, we're all reflections of God. We're all little sparks of God, right? You know. So, okay, that will take a lot more than 15 minutes to explain. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Then, of course, we have the Last Supper, Luke 23, 22. So, the first, how he comes in. Even before that. Oh, yeah. Um, this, okay, Luke 22. This is your hour, the time for the power of darkness. Yeah. So when Jesus is in, he has the Last Supper with his disciples, and they go out to the Mount of Olives, and he's the sword, they come and they get him, so he says, "This is your hour, the time for the power of darkness." So he said, don't. He put the ear back on the servant who had his ear cut off, and that part always stood out to me. Um, in other words, there's a time for darkness and there's a time for light, right? So he said, "This is your time." So what we're seeing right now, what I see is, you know, yeah, there's gonna be darkness, but the power of light is so strong, right? Um, it's almost like, um, the darkness is much more noticeable. It's coming out. It's like the last, you know, big. It's your hour. Okay, this is your time for the light to shine. The dark also had to have its time, right? And that's the duality of the world, right? That we live in. It's darkness and light. Um, yeah. So then, um, here we go. So yeah. So I want to get to the song. I want to wrap it up, but where he says to the, he's brought before, Jesus is brought before Herod and Pilate, and where he, they say, "Are you the Son of God?" And he says, "You say that I am." I mean, I am. That's significant because it's each one. It's a reflection of themselves, how they saw him. Who do you say that I am? Right? And so that brings to our attention all the different ways that God, you know, shows up in human form, right? That's what Jesus was trying to tell us. Um, yeah, and then yeah. So the other thing I noticed that I had never really seen before, um, you know, you, Jesus was carrying the cross, and he said, "Women, weep for yourselves," and that whole and then he said something about the mountains. If the mountains fall and the hills cover us. So if these things are done when the wood is green, what happens when they're dry? So it's interesting. My son's he's a forestry major, and the reference here that hit me was to the wood being green and dry. Um, in other words, when the wood is dry, it's it's sort of you know things things have gone from being fertile to being dry to being barren. Right, barren. There's this image of women being barren and woods being barren, and that's and he's carrying the cross when he says this. All right, so there's this tree imagery, and so there's it's judgment. He's talking about you know wanting the hills to cover. It's wanting people are going to want to hide from God out of fear. At the judgment, the final judgment, they're going to want to hide in a cave, to hide under the hills, to run for cover. Oh, that would have been a good song. Run for cover. Do what they say what they want. Okay. One thing leads to another. Oh, stop it. Okay. So get to the song. One other thought I had was there's references to the tarot in the Passion, where the cups, which is water, emotion. Take this cup from me, where they drink from the cup at the Last Supper. Then there's the swords and the clubs, that the soldiers bring to get Jesus. Why do you come at me with swords and clubs? That's, swords are air sign. And then the clubs are like wands, fire. And then we have the pieces of silver, that's pentacles, that's the earth, right? So if you think about it, all the tarot shows up in the song. All right, that's it. I'm done with the Bible. Um, some people are going to come at me for this, but I'm bringing the Rolling Stones in this week. It's the Rolling Stone. And, thinking about Good Friday when Jesus crucified and they roll the stones. I mean, it's not far fetched, is it? I think it's beast of burden. Walk for miles, my feet are hurting. It's Pisces again. At the washing of the feet, that's all Pisces, right? Those of you who are not Catholic, who are not familiar with these, you might not get this, but if you've been hearing these readings for years, you know what I'm talking about. The images to do with Holy Week. Jesus on the donkey, coming into Jerusalem on the beast of burden, right? Rolling Stones, 1978, got up to number 8 on the Billboard. It was released, August 28th, 1978. I was 12, almost 13. The single was recorded in 77. That's the year Chiron was discovered. Isn't that funny? Keith Richards wrote this. And so he said he wrote it to thank Mick Jagger for shouldering, you know, uh, the the burden of keeping the band going when he was closing down the lab, I guess cleaning himself up from various things, substances that he was imbibing. So anyway, um, so Mick Jagger said the song was not heartfelt, but it was an attitude. This song, a soul begging song. So even he said it was soul begging. It was it was an appeal. It was a plea, you know, you know, and there's suffering. Um, so, beast of burden is defined as a domestic animal that labors for the benefit of humans. So, the fact that Jesus came into Jerusalem on a beast of burden and, emptied himself as a slave to take on, you know, so that he could be exalted. But first, he had to take on that burden, right? So, it's kind of like Mick Jagger, helping his friend taking on these things so that they as a band could have more success and keep going. So there's what the gotta get a new notebook. Zazoo. Okay. Um, you know, so it says it's throw it all at me. I can these are the lyrics in the song. I can shrug it off. Throw it all at me. I can shrug it off. You keep telling me I ain't your kind of man. How everybody kept telling Jesus, right? Well, you're not this, you're not that. Give us Barabbas. You're not what we want you to be. You know, and this is typical for me, the human design for the Martyr Heretic. um, people saw him as the savior, right? They put everything on him. They, you know, he said, "You kept it put me out of misery." Yeah, in other words, people put it on him. You're supposed to save us, right? You're Jesus. It says, "I just want to make love to you." Jesus just wants us to love each other. You know, He wants us. Came to show us that we have to take responsibility for. You can't put it on anybody else, right? You have to. Keith Richards, he had to do his own work. He had to go through his own dark valley. He had to carry his cross. Mick Jagger carried his cross, right? Um, we can't do it for somebody else. We have to do it for ourselves, right? And so, you know, Jesus, he did it in a very public way for us to see he was the master, for us to see, but we can't put it on him and say, okay, because Jesus died, that means I'm good. I don't have to do anything. No, that's, we have to do it for ourselves, right? Um, we have to bear the burden, and relieve ourselves of whatever our soul came into this life to deal with. We can't say, just because we have a spouse or a friend or somebody, they can't do it for us, right? We have to do it. We have to be our own beasts of burden. Wear comfortable shoes. You know, walk for miles. Your feet are hurting. Getting way too deep, Zazoo. Way too deep this week. Okay. I'm very hungry, so I've been fasting while I'm doing this. I'm gonna go have my usual snack, my paleo hot chocolate and rice cake and cashew butter. I gotta clean out the leftovers because this week I gotta make my salmon pies. I can't believe it's Easter already. I mean, I gotta make my salmon pie and I don't know what's going on with Easter. I gotta call my dad, work it out. But it's not gonna be any big thing. I don't know. It's gonna be in the moment. I'm gonna figure it out on the fly. Anyway, I'm gonna keep it to 30 minutes this week. So yeah, wishing you um, you know blessings this week, and I'll be back on Easter, sometime Easter weekend. If it's not on Easter Sunday, then the day after. Uh, Same place, different time. Have a great week. See you later.